Okay, good evening everyone, or to those who are watching, live or later. As you noticed from the thumbnail, we're going to be looking at the recent military action that has taken place in Syria, courtesy of Britain, France and Donald Trump. If this is in fact live like I think it should be. Is it live? It is, yay! Now what we're going to focus on is, first of all, what happened, a series of events as it were, but also the response the Prime Minister gave in Parliament. Hello, Laura. So first things first, what do I need? I need this image, yes, which I probably should have set up on OBS. Fuck it, we're not going to do that at all. We're just going to go straight into the video. And my intention is to go for as long as I can, or until the BBC copyright claim it. Whichever happens first, because it's highly likely the BBC would, even though this is actually a live stream taken from their YouTube channel. So you'd think this would fall under fair use. And I watched this on the BBC iPlayer Parliament channel, and some of the things that had me thinking when she talks about evidence, because a lot of this is just restating what I covered in my video yesterday? Yes, yesterday. But because this is now in Parliament, a lot of questions are asked, and I want to go through a number of them, including that of Jeremy Corbyn. A focal point, certainly a focal point, is one about evidence. Now, when I was thinking about this today, it occurred to me there are a number of nations we can conclusively prove are either A, causing immense suffering to their people, or have weapons that are incredibly dangerous and in breach of international law that we have done nothing about. So let's quickly go through the list. So firstly, as far as causing suffering goes to their own people, North Korea is quite high on that list. They also have nuclear weapons. Whether they are good or functional or not is irrelevant. Why haven't we attacked? We surely have more evidence that they've done more harm to their people than we do for Syria. The answer is simple. Because of China. Okay? We supposedly have... Hello, Disconar. And Davey and Noob with Brush and John the Bemused. Number one. Hello, all of you. You pay your license fee, you own it. True, but apparently that's utter nonsense to them, who seem to want to copyright to claim everything. We'll certainly find out tomorrow with a video I'm going to put out from one of their channels. So another country that features on this list of doing heinous things would surely be Russia. Not to the people, but they have used... Sorry. After lengthy investigations, we have concluded Novichok did in fact originate from Russia, even though there are sources that claim it actually came from the UK. It gets murky, but surely with the evidence we have, we should order a missile attack on that facility, right? The answer is no. Because Russia have a bigger military than us. It would end poorly. I mean, it would actually end with the Americans probably intervening, but still. Now let's think of another nation that's caused immense suffering to their people. We've got Venezuela, surely. To the point where they're living... The people are certainly living off animals they've killed from the zoo. Socialism, everyone. It always works. Venezuela is like a perfect example of it. And as I've already stated multiple times, if there's only one rich person in charge, you've essentially got a knockoff version of a monarchy. And they don't work out very well either when they have all the power. Yeah. So, we're going to focus on the Parliament video, and I want to try and get through what Theresa May says. I wish that Saki was here and he'd done a bingo card for this, because there are a couple of phrases... Yeah, it would actually end that way. You're quite right. Since we don't actually have... we have fuck all these days. We don't have much in the way of actual Air Force related tech. We have bugger all as far as Navy goes, and our Army, while our politicians claim it's... good idea. They claim it to be the best in the world. It probably is. But you can have the best, say, 100 troops, but going up against countless millions, you're going to get destroyed. Sorry. numbers eventually win. It's like it's basic orc tactic. I'm not calling Russians orcs, but I have seen some of the videos of them, or some of their children, being raised by wolves. They start to look like orcs. It's quite astonishing. Anyway, have I got the right tab for this? Nope, that's Sith stream. There we go. If this needs to be turned up, please let me know. Well, they're our military, basically. They kneel before our queen, after all. If you can't hear this properly... Oh, and actually, before I even say that, the reason I've left it like this is because I want to see the live chat. Because I didn't know about this, so I haven't seen the live chat from this. I watched this on the BBC iPlayer, as I stated. So I didn't get to see this, but I want to see what people in the chat think. As well as you, of course. Because I think the whole concept of... Crap, you're all going to hear a cat in a minute. If you walk on my Warhammer, I'm going to murder you. Yes. Yes, anyway, if you can't hear this properly, please let me know. I will, of course, turn it up.
To toxic chemicals. And based on our...
This. What the fuck? Fuck me. I'm waiting for the swastikas. Okay.
Assessment, we do not think that these reports could be falsified on this scale. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Syrian regime has reportedly been attempting to conceal the evidence by searching evacuees from Douma to ensure samples are not being smuggled from this area.
Interesting fact. The OCPW, I believe, had conducted assessments in the past and found none. Not a single trace of sarin or any chemical weapons. That's not to say this didn't happen. I'm still not going to commit to whether or not it did or not. Okay? But the OCPW or OPCW, I can't remember which one it is, they said there wasn't any there and even caused a few people to backpedal on that assessment, which she will later make a statement about about sarin or sarin or whatever you want to call it. She's going to be wrong. Okay. Also, the OPCW or OCPW, I can't remember, they were actually due out on the day the attacks happened, the military strike happened. They were due out. I know that there was a block on it at the time, I believe by Russia, but I don't think they were going to get through anyway, what with the whole, decimating all the actual evidence, leaving only trace evidence at best. Meow. Yes. Meow. 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 Oh God, kill me now.
And a wider operation to conceal the facts of the attack is underway, supported by the Russians. Mr. Speaker, the images of this suffering are utterly haunting.
Just another little thing about the images. A number of people have made this quite clear to me, that while some of the images could be true, a lot of them have been faked, and I do remember touching on that in my last video with one particular image. But there are a number where people have been frothing at the mouth. Some of those images are faked, and as harrowing as they might be, it is. Oh God, you're on my shoulders now. Oh God, get off. Chairman Meow. Yes, she is indeed Chairman Meow. What do you want? No! Don't stand on my tablet. Oh God, the chat. Get off. There we go. I love also the chat on this. Fuck me hard. Yeah, so the images that she'll claim are harrowing may or may not be real. So I think it's such a tricky one. I don't know how a cat meows underwater, but I would assume it's the effect of it doesn't, it dies. Long live me. Get off my hand.
Innocent families seeking shelter in underground bunkers, found dead with foam in their mouths, burns to their eyes.
The chat. Theresa Blair. It is actually, no, you know what, that's actually a good point. Because I believe Tony Blair that is, for those that are a bit too young to remember, he stood in Parliament and talked about how Iraq claimed that they would be ready for war in 45 minutes or something, that could issue a nuclear strike. Grumble. Was it Libya? Iraq. And it was proven to be rubbish. And I hope the same thing happens to you, Teresa, right now. I really do. Because you're an actual embarrassment right now.
And their bodies surrounded by a chlorine-like odour.
But chlorine couldn't kill them, you fucking idiot. Okay, so brief science lesson, everyone. Chlorine. Oh no! Do not stand on the laptop. Get off the laptop. Get off. Oh my god. Ah. Okay. Cat just tried to climb over my shoulder onto the laptop to then over the microphone. Let's just leave it at that. Chlorine is heavier than air, so it immediately will sink to the ground. Let's not forget here, in Syria of all places, it would dissipate very quickly. Like, ridiculously quickly. I'm not saying some people didn't have a build-up of fluid in their lungs, because it will, if enough of it is ingested, turn your insides to goo. Of course it will. But this is the kind of tactics used in World War I. The nearest you'll get in this day and age to having your lungs turn to goo is if you're in the swimming pool for too long. You know when people go swimming and they go underwater, and you realise after a lengthy period of time you can't stay underwater for as long as you used to. Yeah, that's because you've got a bit too much chlorine in your lungs. I'm not now, again, I have to stress that this isn't me saying that this is absolute bullshit. I just find it hard to believe, you know, what with me having a background in chemistry and think it's very difficult to believe that you'd use chlorine on people and think it's an effective chemical weapon. For those who didn't see, I was doing air quotes around chemical weapon. Am I the only one who finds Omegon's cat woes are more interesting than the PM shit? Where's that fucking cat gone? Did you just stand on my retributors, you bastard? Oh, right.
Children gasping for life as chemicals choked their lungs. The fact that such an atrocity can take place in our world today is a stain on our humanity.
Well, let's think of a whole list of things that are a stain on our humanity. I think of a lot of things that don't get addressed. That is just an appeal to emotion. You need to stop that. This is why this kind of politics doesn't work on me. I don't care about the emotional aspect. I care about the fact. And you don't have any. You have reports. You have claims. You have no actual concrete evidence. In fact, evidence you're going to claim you had gets rubbished, or has already been rubbished, by the OPCW? Can someone confirm to me if it's the OCPW or OPCW? Because I can't remember and it's bugging me.
And we are clear about who is responsible. A significant body of information, including intelligence, indicates the
Citation needed.
Syrian regime is responsible for this latest attack.
Citation needed.
Open source accounts state that barrel bombs were used to deliver the chemicals.
This is stuff she stated in her speech 2 days ago. Okay? Where these statements come from, though, are questionable.
Barrel bombs are usually delivered by helicopters. Multiple open source...
I would like to point out that just because they are doesn't mean they were.
Source reports and intelligence indicates that regime helicopters operated over Douma on the evening of the 7th of April, shortly before...
It is, number one, it's guilty until proven innocent, and that's why this attack is a bit weird. Actually, on that note, on Twitter, I had this exchange with someone, and I wish I'd had enough time to pull up the images for it, where they didn't believe... okay, so I was talking about how I felt that this particular military action had to go before Parliament, and it wasn't a case of letting our enemies know, because it was pretty much already known it was going to happen at least a week ago. We knew we were going to be doing something. So as far as I'm concerned, because that was known, not only did they have time to act on it, but at the same time, it could have been discussed in Parliament. Now, somebody on Twitter interacted with me on this and indicated they disagree with this. Now, I don't care if they disagreed with me on that, but they mentioned that they felt that this was... And, oh God. If you're in the chat and you weren't one engaged with me on this, I'm not trying to be rude, but what you said came across as very tinfoil hatty, in that you felt that based on the explosion patterns of the decimated buildings that we targeted, you felt this was collusion not just between the governments involved in the attacks, but also the Russians and the Syrians to make Syrian Assad look good, and so on. Which made me feel very... It was you. Duan, I'm not mocking. It confused... I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'd go that far anyway. And the fallout is rather interesting, certainly with the claims in multiple sources that, Russia's preparing for a cyber attack on the United Kingdom. I don't believe that for a second. That's not... it's not really much of a response, to be honest. It just seems wasteful. Also equally tinfoil hatty. Possibly more, actually. I would argue it might be more of a tinfoil hat thing. Since Russia, if I remember correctly, did intercept some of the missiles that were aimed. I think? Then again, there was also a claim that an Israeli attack happened last night, but that wasn't the case at all. It was just a false alarm. Nice to know that Syria jumped on that and accused the Jews! Doesn't matter. By the way, if you notice this, what do you think of the chat in this particular thing so far? Because it's really interesting. And yeah, Duan, it's not a popular theory, but at this moment in time, again, I'm not... While I thought it was tinfoil hatty, I'm not willing to discard it. Because, honestly, based on what she's going in on, there's no fact. There's no actual verifiable fact. It's an absolute joke. Never mind. Count Dankula for president, yes. Why not?
4 reports emerged in social media of a chemical attack, and the Syrian military officials coordinated what appears to be the use of chlorine weapons.
Okay. I was about to shout, fuck off, that's not a weapon. You basically hit the, you hit the chemical weapons, sorry, you hit the depot that holds all the swimming pool cleaning products. Congratulations.
Mr. Speaker, no other group could have carried out this attack. The opposition does not operate helicopters or use barrel bombs. Daesh does not even have a presence in Douma.
Well, imagine my shock. Daesh is fucking non-existent almost. Okay, almost. That was known ages ago when Russia claimed victory over this. But it doesn't stop the rebels' existence. But then again, you're going to disregard the rebels here and say they couldn't have done it. No proof to say it even happened in the first place. And just the thing, when there's a civil war going on, I'm surprised at you that you would actually get involved in this one. I mean, is there any oil in Syria? If there is, then we're going to war. Just wondering, that's all.
And the reports of this attack are consistent with previous regime attacks. These include the attack on the 21st of August 2013, where over 800 people were killed and thousands more injured in a chemical attack also in Ghouta.
If I remember correctly, the attack she's referring to was debunked. Yeah.
14 further smaller-scale chemical attacks reported prior to that summer. 3 further chlorine attacks.
Also of interest, in 2013, Syria was made to destroy or have someone come and destroy all their chemical weapons. That's not to say they didn't build up a new stock, but they abided the Chemical Weapons Convention and had them destroyed. Just want to add that into this factoid. Also the fact that there has actually not been any proof for quite a number of the attacks she has mentioned.
In 2014 and 2015, which the independent UN...
Oh, yes, I heard about this Dibula, but surely, if you want to believe... okay, so Dibula mentions an oil line through Syria. Would it not be easier to instead just go to Venezuela? Yeah.
An SC-mandated investigation attributed to the regime. And the attack at Khan Sheikhoun on the 4th of April last year, where the Syrian regime used sarin against its people killing around 100 with a further 500 casualties. Based on the
no proof.
Regime's persistent pattern of behaviour and the cumulative analysis of specific incidents, we judged it highly likely that the Syrian regime had continued to use chemical weapons on at least 4 occasions since the attack in Khan Sheikhoun.
Citation needed. Actual citation needed. Because you haven't proven anything. That's the really damning statement here. And I get that it could in fact be proven to be true. I get that. But then it raises the question of, you had to have it proven after you committed the attack, because you didn't prove it beforehand. I know you now could use the excuse of, Russia blocked us from actually going in. So, Russia also poisoned a couple of our people. You didn't do shit about that either. Just makes you look like a pussy. A selective pussy at that. Oh, for Europe. Well, we are reliant on the Russians, I believe, for, is it gas? Or is it gas and oil? Which is actually another thing of interest, because people were worried after the Novichok incident. They were worried that Russia would cut off our supply, because we're quite reliant. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. But then again, I don't use heating, so I don't really give a shit. If I get cold, I just put on another jumper, or light a candle, or put some pocket warmers in my pockets.
And we judged that they would have continued to do so. So we needed to intervene rapidly to alleviate further indiscriminate humanitarian suffering.
Selective. We have verifiable proof other countries are doing far worse to their people, and you do nothing. You have not enough proof, and you go in. This just makes you look like Trump's bitch. And I'm not criticising Trump, because I'm sure he has his own reasons. But I am criticising you for being someone else's bitch, or coming across as being someone else's bitch. I'm curious here. Do you in the chat think that Theresa May did this because she made the decision to? Or because she wanted to create a special friendship similar to that of Tony Blair and George W. Bush? You know, without the war crimes, which I think she'll, if not proven to be true, inevitably be charged on.
Mr. Speaker, we've explored every possible diplomatic channel to do so, but our efforts have been repeatedly thwarted. Following the sarin attack in eastern Damascus back in August 2013, the Syrian regime committed to dismantle its chemical weapon program.
And there's plenty of evidence to support the fact that they did have plenty of, well, they had lots of chemical weapons destroyed. Whether it was all of them or not, that's a debatable subject. Without going in and scouring the nation in 2013, I can't do shit.
And Russia promised to ensure that Syria did this, overseen by the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. At the weekend, the leader of the opposition cited this diplomatic agreement as a precedent that this process can work. But this process did not work. It did not eradicate the chemical weapons capability of the Syrian regime.
Citation needed.
With only last month, the OPCW finding that Syria's declaration of its former chemical weapons programme is incomplete.
To John the Bemused, this does in fact seem quite distracting. Certainly from Brexit, certainly from a number of concerns that have arisen in our country. For example, the increase in knife crime in London, to the point where I think it's now 60 people have been killed with knives since the turn of the year in London. That is horrific. It's a higher number than it has ever been. In the last 10 years, I believe. It might have been higher before then. Yeah. Anyways, carry on.
And as I've already set out, it did not stop the Syrian regime from carrying out the most abhorrent atrocities using these weapons.
Citation needed. A lot of the evidence you claim to have you won't provide, which is sad. And you mentioned thwarted through diplomacy. Okay, so we believe in diplomacy, we believe in democracy. But when we don't get our own way, we decide to circumvent that and act out. Do you know what else do that? Sorry, you know who else does that? Children. Children go out of their way to ignore when they're told they can't do something. How pathetic are you that you would ignore diplomacy because, oh, Russia blocked us, they vetoed this? That is not a good enough reason. You must work with them to convince them. If you cannot convince them, then clearly you are not good enough.
Furthermore, on each occasion when we...
Oh, and of interest, just because she's going to bleat on, if you care so much about human life, you wouldn't be selling arms, military arms, to the Saudis who use it on Yemeni people. You wouldn't be doing that. Now, I support the whole whole trade thing. I support that. But if you actually care about how people act with stuff that we give them, then surely you would do more to prevent it. Corbyn, I watched this, and he actually raises some really good points. And after this, by the way, there was a debate on this. There was a debate and then a vote. The problem is, though, the debate was about whether or not the government, I believe, about giving the government, whether the government should bring this before Parliament. But it was not a legal vote, so no one had to actually be there. It was a pointless exercise. Now, there is one about this later on in the week, and I'm looking forward to that because I think this one might be a bit more binding. And I think the government will be made to actually bring this before Parliament. I'm kind of hoping that... I know the SNP tried to win that vote, but it was such a pointless one, there was no reason to. Hence why virtually no Labour MPs were there. It was just an exercise. The government didn't even have to respect it if they lost. But I do hope that they lose this time. But not... I think it has to be subjective. If it's 4 things that everyone knows going to happen, it's already well known, it's already out there, then that should be brought before Parliament and then assessed, debated and voted on. Because while you want to give the Prime Minister power, I think she needs to be accountable. That's not to say she isn't afterwards with committees and inquiries are going to happen. I just think in Parliament it's more, well, everyone can see it, so we get to question it, and I don't know, I think it's more, I think almost fair. If it's actual freaking all-out war, of course that's not going to go before Parliament because, well, that building's not going to be there anymore, is it? You know what I mean. I know I'm being a bit weird on that, but I think the point stands. Oh, blimey, let's close that tray again. Right. Anyway, let's continue. Oh, hello to new people in the chat. Yes. Look at that, 3 minutes, 45 seconds in. Get the real Illuminati truth check. Oh, for God's sake. Theresa May, why would you encourage the US? The great Satan. Anyway.
We have seen every sign of chemical weapons being used. Russia has blocked any attempt to hold the perpetrators to account at the UN Security Council.
That does not mean you can suddenly launch a missile strike on the country you want to investigate because you acting like a pouty little bitch who didn't get their own way. You don't get to choose when you get to use diplomacy and when you get to use freaking military might. You stupid woman.
With 6 such vetoes since the start of 20...
No one cares how many vetoes. It shows, okay, yes, Russia are pouty little bitches as well for completely saying no. But you need to do better to improve Russian relations, or relations with Russia, to get them to agree. Surely you value diplomacy in this. I'm not a pacifist. I do understand there is sometimes a need for military action. But I do not believe you're the right person to negotiate shit. You're such a weak Prime Minister.
17. And just last week, Russia blocked a UN resolution that would have established an independent investigation able to determine responsibility for this latest attack.
My earlier comments about, so you didn't get your own way, seem quite appropriate then after that particular statement?
So regrettably, we had no choice but to conclude that diplomatic action on its own is not going to work.
I'm sorry for the silence, but I really believe you're a fucking idiot. Actual idiot. And the question there, Ali Hassan Mirza, where is the evidence? If you really want us to believe this, you're going to have to lay it out for us. Because I don't believe any of it at the moment. And she is, yes, Davy, she's a weak Prime Minister that will get us into another decades-long war. She will. That is sad. It's actually quite sad.
The Leader of the Opposition has said that he can only countenance involvement in Syria if there is UN authority behind it. The House should be clear. That would mean a Russian veto on our foreign policy.
So you flouted UN policy to get what you wanted. How very self-serving of you. It's interesting how you'll portray the globalist when it suits you.
When the Cabinet met on Thursday, we considered the advice of the Attorney General. Based on this advice, we agreed that it was not just morally right, but also legally right to take military action, together with our closest allies, to alleviate further humanitarian suffering.
What the fuck are you talking about?
This was not about intervening in a civil war, and it was not about regime change.
But of course you could have done that if you wanted. I mean, it worked so well last time trying to bring peace to the Middle East. Why not continue that? We did so well last time.
It was about a limited, targeted and effective strike that sought to alleviate the humanitarian suffering of the Syrian people by degrading the Syrian regime's chemical weapons capability and deterring their use. And we have published the legal basis for this action.
I've not seen this, but I'm sure it's enlightening. I will, by the way, go and get it after this and put it in the description for those that are interested.
It required 3 conditions to be met. First, there must be convincing evidence generally accepted by the international community as a whole of extreme humanitarian distress on a large scale, requiring immediate and urgent relief.
Think of all the countries that actually fit the criteria of that particular statement. Now think how little we actually do for any of them. Yeah.
Second, it must be objectively clear that there is no practicable alternative to the use of force if lives are to be saved.
It's nice that you really did, quotes, exhaust your diplomacy.
And third, the proposed use of force must be necessary and proportionate to the aim of relief of humanitarian suffering and must be strictly limited in time and in scope to this aim. These are the same 3 criteria used as the legal justification for the UK's role in the NATO intervention in Kosovo. Our intervention in 1991 with the US and France, and in 1992 with the US, to create safe havens and enforce the no-fly zones in Iraq following the Gulf War, were also justified on the basis of humanitarian intervention.
Those worked, certainly the Iraq-related stuff worked out so well that we welcomed a lot of people here that didn't want to be here. It certainly bred a certain seed of disdain towards us for our involvement because we're all about being better than everyone else. Someone else also commented to me that they thought this was another one of those ploys to have more refugees come here. I believe we set a target of 10,000 and we met it. And I do believe it gets mentioned by Ian Blackford later on in this about wanting to take more refugees in, which seemed to that person who commented be the whole point, to just take in more refugees for our, quotes, cultural enrichment. Which, if true, is a bit concerning.
So governments of all colours have long considered that military action on an exceptional basis, where necessary and proportionate, and as a last resort to avert an overwhelming humanitarian catastrophe, is permissible under international law. Mr. Speaker, I've set out why we are convinced by the evidence and why there was no practicable alternative. Let me set out how this military response was also proportionate. This was a limited, targeted and effective strike that would significantly degrade Syrian chemical weapons capabilities and deter their future use, and with clear boundaries.
Do you really think destroying 3 facilities actually deters the government from using what you say they have? I mean, if they've got a little extra left over, why not just use it? Or just use it anyway? I mean, you're not actually providing an incentive, you're just saying, yeah, we'll blow your shit up. Because that'll totally deter someone from not wanting to act out. And someone mentioned in the chat, where is it? The solutions for Britain to begin colonising the heathens, yes. Belial, you mentioned, so why aren't lefties getting their panties in a bunch over brown people getting bombed into oblivion? I believe in this instance, I believe this wasn't actually aimed at people, but 3 facilities that I think only a couple of people are claimed to be injured from. And yes, when the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia turned up, who does promote some human rights, not all of them yet, he's got time to get that done, she was quite courteous to him. She may well have shown him her hindquarters. Yes, no one got killed. I believe there was a mention of injury in a paper, but I don't know which one. I just don't care enough. There was something else. What was it? Something important and relevant to this. Nope, gone. Okay, let's continue.
That expressly sought to avoid escalation and did everything possible to prevent civilian casualties. As a result, the coordinated actions of the US, UK and France were successfully and specifically targeted at 3 sites.
I'm bored of this part already. I'm bored of this shit. Let's continue on.
Reducing yet further any such risk of civilian casualties.
I only skipped that part because she references what we use with silly gay little names, and I just don't care. She is reciting the statement from the other day.
Mr. Speaker, while targeted and limited, these strikes by the US, UK and France were significantly larger than the US action a year ago after the attack at Khan Sheikhoun, and specifically designed to have a greater impact on the regime's capability and willingness to use chemical weapons. We also minimise the chances of wider escalation through our carefully targeted approach, and the House will note that Russia has not reported any losses of personnel or equipment as a result of these strikes. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in paying tribute to all the British servicemen and women and their American and French allies who successfully carried out this mission with such courage and professionalism. Mr. Speaker,
dear freaking God, you're so boring. Firstly, yes, fantastic. You conducted a mission to perfection. Congratulations. But more importantly, did they actually have anything in them? Like those facilities? Because all you've got is your claims of intelligence, but you're not showing us anything. Maybe we should have the committee thing already, so she can actually put what she had, show us her cards for this one. Because I think it's important we actually know what she had to go on. She can claim that she can't for security reasons. If names are mentioned, sure, redact the names. But give us the information. I'm not asking for much. Maybe I'm just petty in this, because I think this is quite silly. Oh, that pause face. That is... yeah.
let me deal specifically with 3 important questions. First, why did we not wait for the investigation from the OPCW? UNSC mandated inspectors have investigated previous attacks and on 4 occasions decided that the regime was indeed responsible. We are confident in our own assessment that the Syrian regime was highly likely responsible for this attack, and that its persistent pattern of behaviour meant that it was highly likely to continue using chemical weapons. Furthermore, there were clearly attempts to block any proper investigation, as we saw with the Russian veto at the UN earlier in the week. And let me set this out in detail. We support strongly the work of the OPCW
OPCW, thank fuck for that. You finally give me what I actually wanted to know.
Finding mission that is currently in Damascus. But
I love this. Discanar pointing out Meg called someone boring. Yes, this is incredibly boring, because she's only repeating what she said earlier. I'm not criticising you, by the way, Diskana, but the fact is she's not really adding anything new. Something, by the way, that is going to crop up. Whenever she's asked a question, her response will include the phrase, as I said earlier in my speech. It's going to come up a lot. If any of you have hair on your head, don't pull it. You'll be tempted. Just don't. It is quite infuriating.
But that mission is only able to make an assessment of whether chemical weapons were used. Even if the OPCW team is able to visit Duma to gather information to make that assessment, and they are currently being prevented from doing so by the regime and the Russians, it cannot attribute responsibility. This is because Russia vetoed in November 2017 an extension of the joint investigatory mechanism set up to do this. And last week, in the wake of the Duma attack, it again vetoed a new UNSC resolution to re-establish such a mechanism.
Why did Russia do that? I am curious. I am curious if they had their own work going on at the time, or if they just didn't want you intervening while they were conducting military stuff over in Syria. Because they have been involved, unlike us, quite heavily in, well, shit, really. Most of the stuff over there is just shit. No one cares. Well, I don't particularly. But it does make me wonder if the veto was, if there was a reason for it. I'm not trying to downplay what Theresa May is saying or anything. I wanted to try and postulate an answer. Or a theory, without a tinfoil hat anyway.
And even if we had OPCW's findings and a mechanism to attribute, for as long as Russia continues to veto, the UN Security Council still would not be able to act. So, Mr. Speaker, we cannot...
Okay, native. So, Omegon, do you keep electing these prime ministers out of some sort of 10-step program as a nation, misplaced guilt for the empire and their past? I don't. I've never voted in a general election in this country. I wanted to once in 2010, and I'm very lucky I didn't, because I was going to vote Liberal Democrat, but I forgot to. So, when they got elected in as a coalition and then shafted all the students, I felt that my trust could no longer be, placed in any party.
Wait to alleviate further humanitarian suffering caused by chemical weapons attacks. Second, were we not just following orders from America? Let me be absolutely clear. We have acted because it is in our national interest.
Oh, that's a damning quote. Oh no. So many people are going to use that against you. It's in this country's interests. Are you kidding me? Oh no. That one is going to be on your tombstone. That one is going to be used against you so many times. That has been used by Tony Blair. He has said that. Oh my life. You don't want to be compared to Tony Blair, do you, Theresa? Ah, dear.
It is in our national interest to prevent the further use of chemical weapons in Syria and to uphold and defend the global consensus that these weapons should not be used. For we cannot allow...
You can make the claim about the weapons, but you still haven't proven the weapons existed. You haven't proven it. So essentially you're asserting a lot. And then again using another appeal. I feel like there's a fallacy in there somewhere. It doesn't work with us. Which explains why there are so many thumbs down on this. I'm just going to add my support to this because I think it's dog shit. There we go. I disliked it.
The use of chemical weapons to become normalised, either within Syria, on the streets of the UK or elsewhere. So we have not done this because President Trump asked us to do so. We
Citation needed.
have done it because we believed it was the right thing to do, and we are not alone. There is broad-based international support for the action we've taken. NATO has issued a statement setting out its support.
Yeah, NATO did, and that statement was pretty much horseshit.
As have the Gulf Cooperation Council and a number of countries in the region. And over the weekend, I have spoken to a range of world leaders, including Chancellor Merkel, Prime Minister Gentiloni.
who was somewhat silent throughout all of this. You'd think with Germany being quite powerful, she would have gotten involved. You don't suppose that has anything to do with the fact that she's one of the weakest leaders of her country right now? Let's face it, her rule is only held together by 2 coalitions. She's not very strong right now. Who knew a 5th-term leader would actually be really weak, especially when she let her country be flooded?
Lonely, Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Turnbull,
all of whom did nothing as well. Don't show support with these cucks. It doesn't mean shit. They can support you all you like, but they didn't assist. And also didn't act. I wonder if they didn't act because, you know, there wasn't any actual evidence.
and Union Council President Donald Tusk all have expressed their support for the actions that Britain, France and America have taken. Third, why did we not recall Parliament? Mr. Speaker, the speed with which we acted was essential in cooperating with our partners to alleviate further humanitarian suffering and to maintain the vital security of our operations.
Just because you blew some buildings up doesn't mean you've alleviated humanitarian suffering. It just means you blew 3 buildings up. Taking away a weapon doesn't mean that they won't find a new one, if they are indeed harming their people. People are rather creative, after all.
Operations.
Oh, and I'm not in any way going to defend Assad. The guy is no better than Kim Jong-un, in that he basically inherited his rule from his father with some Mickey Mouse election. LOL. Okay, I'm going to, just for a change of subject, for a bit of fun, I've just got an alert from UPS, and this brings up a fantastic conversation from earlier that I had with someone on my server. UPS are the company that's delivering the tentacle blanket that I ordered on Friday. Right, they're delivering it tomorrow, but they want me to pay a customs charge on that shit of about £24, which works out at about just over a third of what I paid for the entire thing, including postage. Thank you, UPS. Fucked if I'm paying that.
This was a limited, targeted strike on a legal basis that has been used before, and it was a decision which required the evaluation of intelligence and information, much of which was of a nature that could not be shared with Parliament.
Well, maybe it should be now. Because you've already done the attacks. Now it's about damn time you showed us what you had to go on, what leg you had to stand on to commit an attack. Oh shit, sorry. Why is there a customs charge? Because I believe it's considered a luxury item. Yeah.
We have always been clear that the government has the right to act quickly in the national interest.
And Dibula, come on. I know your national anthem is the Team America theme song, and if it isn't, it bloody well should. I would love that to happen, by the way. Go to an NFL match. Everyone rise for the national anthem. And it just goes, America, fuck yeah.
I'm absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that it is Parliament's responsibility to hold me to account for such decisions, and Parliament will do so.
When she said this, I was tweeting at the time, and I made it quite clear I wanted her flayed. I want her sautéed. I want her slow cooked. I want the suffering to be prolonged. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. A number of politicians, certainly on her side of the benches, support this. But I don't. Because again, the evidence is not there. It's hearsay, assertion, and claims. That is not evidence.
But it is my responsibility as Prime Minister to make these decisions, and I will make them. Mr. Speaker, as I have been clear, this military action was not about intervening in the civil war in Syria or about regime change. But we are determined to do our utmost to help resolve the conflict in Syria. That means concluding the fight.
How do we conclude this when you've got extremist Islamists on one side in Duma and a claimed dictator on the other side? A moderate against extremists. Who could possibly win?
Fight against Daesh, which still holds pockets of territory in Syria. It means working to enable humanitarian access and continuing our efforts at the forefront of global response, where the UK has already committed almost £2.5 billion, our largest ever response to a single humanitarian crisis. And next week we will attend the second Brussels conference on supporting the future of Syria and the region, which will focus on humanitarian support, bolstering the UN-led political process in Geneva, and ensuring continued international support to refugees and host countries, driving forward the legacy of our own London conference held in 2016. And it means supporting international efforts to reinvigorate the process to deliver a political solution, for this is the best long-term hope for the Syrian people. The UK will do all of these things.
Do you know what the real best hope for the Syrian people is? Ditching that religion that's causing such a nasty divide. How about that? I'm not saying they should all just stop being Muslim, but if they did, I can see there being less of an issue because the barrier that separates them, which is entirely faith-based, is gone.
But as I've also been clear, that is not what these military strikes were about. Mr. Speaker, as I've set out, the military action that we have taken this weekend was specifically focused on degrading the Syrian regime's chemical weapons capability and deterring their future use. In order to achieve this, there must also be a wider diplomatic effort, including the full range of political and economic levers, to strengthen the global norms prohibiting the use of chemical weapons, which have stood for nearly a century.
Right. Maybe we should do something about North Korea now. I know they're starting to talk with South Korea, but they do have nuclear weapons. Surely we want to deter that as well. I know it's a bit of a stretch from that. I just wanted to add a break to it because I don't want BBC to copyright claim this.
So we will continue to work with our international partners on tough economic action against those involved with the production or dissemination of chemical weapons. And I welcome the conclusion of today's European Foreign Affairs Council, attended by my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary.
Bumbling fool Boris.
That confirmed the Council is willing to consider further restrictive measures on those involved in the development and use of chemical weapons in Syria.
Yay.
We will continue to push for the re-establishment of an international investigative mechanism which can attribute responsibility for chemical weapon use in Syria.
But still, without enough evidence, you're acting on complete lack of it. Just saying, this all seems a lot when you don't have the proof. You're willing to start a war without enough of it. And all because what? Russia wouldn't give you what you wanted? That seems a bit petulant.
We will advance with our French allies.
Okay, also a hallmark of US foreign policy. Yes, very true. Tell others how to fix their country because we're such experts at fixing. Yes, that is quite true about America. You're fantastic at it. If by fixing you mean blowing shit up and stealing resources. Syria needs to counterattack with missiles on the British capability to produce acid. Have to balance out the human rights offensive everywhere you know. True. I bought this chemical recently for old Warhammer miniatures that are made out of metal. It's called a cellulose thinner. Now I tried to use paint stripper, regular paint stripper, to get this paint off the metal models. Didn't work. My brother-in-law, he mentioned cellulose thinners, and this stuff, this stuff stripped them clean. I have some old miniatures from Lord of the Rings, metal ones, Frodo, Samwise, Aragorn, and Gollum, and they were painted badly back all those years ago, like when I was 18 years old. So I stripped the paint off, and it came off in seconds. I do need to finish cleaning them, but it ripped the paint off. It kept the detail on them was preserved. Maybe we should ban cellulose thinners because I've been told that stuff will strip the paint off a car. I'm inclined to believe it. I'm not saying we should throw that in people's faces though. It's a step too far.
The new international partnership against impunity for the use of chemical weapons, which will meet in the coming...
I do not use acrylic, David. I use Citadel paints, which I use a paint thinner, not water, to make sure the mix doesn't leave streaks on the miniatures. But the old ones that I'm talking about, they were painted with Citadel paints, but Citadel paints from like 15 years ago. The paint then, the quality is nowhere near as good as it is now. And the paintbrushes also now... Oh, and as a complete contrast, the paintbrushes then are really good, but the paintbrushes now are dog shit. I have to get a new base paintbrush, which really fucks me off.
Weeks, and we will continue to strengthen the international coalition we have built since the attack on Salisbury. Mr. Speaker, last Thursday's report from the OPCW has confirmed our findings that it was indeed a Novichok in Salisbury, and I've placed a copy of that report's executive summary in the library of the House.
Yes, congratulations, but I don't see now that you have evidence on that, you conducting any military strikes on the factory where it was produced. Fucking hypocrite.
While of a much lower order of magnitude, the use of a nerve agent on the streets of Salisbury is part of a pattern of disregard for the global norms that prohibit...
I do, noob. I use a Lemian. Sorry. Yes, I do use that. I'm rubbish with pronunciations.
...use of chemical weapons. So while the action was taken to alleviate humanitarian suffering in Syria by degrading the regime's chemical weapons capability and deterring its use of these weapons, it will also send a clear message to anyone who believes they can use chemical weapons with impunity. We cannot go back to a world...
If you want me to continue playing this and instead move to what Corbyn says, if you want me to stop this and go to what Corbyn says, press 1. If you want me to continue this and then get to Corbyn, press 2. Because honestly, everything she says to me is absolute shit. And I want to get to some of the really good points that Corbyn makes. He does some silly ones, of course he does. But I think it's important that we give him a fair crack of the whip here. Because he asks a lot of questions. I don't think she answers all of them. But she answers a couple. 111. You know what? I'm going to take it. Yeah, she is talking bullshit. You haven't finished fapping yet too. Well, fuck you, Disc, and you just lost. Right. Oh, look at that. He didn't actually go. Look at that. Not that far anyway. Okay, let's see how close we can get it.
To stand up for the global rules and standards that keep us safe. That is what we have.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mute her for a minute and wait. Blah, 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 commending statement to the House. Blah, blah, blah. Right. Let's see what he has to say. I know he does one snide comment about us being the lapdog of the US. Or something to that effect. But I do want to focus on some things he says. And also, look at this. An amazing decision taken by good job PM Theresa May. Right? But it's all fake until nukes start flying. The thing is... above that, Ankit Nirmal. I hope God floods Earth and starts everything again. Where is the evidence of chemical weapons? An actual good question. Right, so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by thanking the Prime Minister for our phone conversation in advance of the bombing raids on Friday night and for an advance copy of her statement today.
Can you imagine this phone call? He's on his allotment planting onions and he's like, "You fucking what, mate?" Because he's a pacifist. He won't go to war. He won't do it. So to him, every act of violence is bad. Although I think he's contradicted himself a little. No, he's fairly consistent on it, I think. But I can imagine it would be quite an uncomfortable conversation for him to have to put up with.
I also join her in paying tribute to Sergeant Matt Tunrow, the SAS sniper from Manchester who was killed on the 28th of March with US forces in northern Syria, and Master Sergeant Jonathan Dunbar from Texas, who was killed in the same attack. I welcome the fact that all British military personnel involved have returned home safely from this mission. The attack in Douma was an horrific attack on civilians using chemical weapons, part of a civil war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. Mr. Speaker, this statement serves as a reminder that the Prime Minister is accountable to this Parliament, not to the whims of the US President. We clearly need a War Powers Act in this country to transform a now broken convention into a legal obligation. Her predecessor came to this House to seek authority.
Something of interest, I want to talk about that war convention, blah blah. Of the discussion I had with Duane, I believe, on Twitter, it occurred to me that it could still be something that could be debated in Parliament, but it could be debated in a closed room. I mean, and then once it had been conducted, then that made public. It's just one of the things that was floating in my head. I wanted to air it, see what people think.
For military action in Libya and in Syria in 2015, and the House had a vote over Iraq in 2003.
Just to address the chat, where is it? Yeah, Momentum Antifa. While I somewhat side with Corbyn on some of his remarks during this, yeah, he got flayed in Parliament today about the anti-Semitism issue, to the point where there was, I think, a Jewish MP who stood up and said, talked about the anti-Semitism that he'd received as a Labour MP. And a Jewish man. It's just terrifying. Some of the shit that his party's been up to is disgusting. But I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on this.
There is no more serious issue than the life and death matters of military action. It is right that Parliament has the power to support or stop the government from taking planned military action. And, Mr. Speaker, the BBC reports that the Prime Minister argued for the bombing to be brought forward to avoid parliamentary scrutiny. Will she today confirm or deny those reports? I believe, Mr. Speaker, the action was legally questionable. And on Saturday,
I just urge members to calm down, because in my experience, some of the members who shout from a sedentary position then also entertain the fanciful idea that they might be called to ask a question. And I wish to disabuse them of that idea. The Prime Minister was heard.
I just want to say that when he said legally questionable, he's quite right. Because we don't have the proof to actually justify it.
Heard in an atmosphere of respectful quiet and order, and that will happen for the Leader of the Opposition as well. No ifs, no buts, no sneers, no exceptions. That is the position. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that the action was legally questionable, and on Saturday the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said as much, reiterating that all countries must act in line with the United Nations Charter, which states action must be in self-defence or be authorised by the United Nations Security Council.
Now, I know the counter-argument is, oh yes, but Russia wouldn't let us. However, if we are to abide the UN, then we have to abide the UN. We don't choose when we want to. And also in this case, it wasn't really... Yeah, it was legally questionable. Based on the very criteria the UN provide.
The Prime Minister has assured us that the Attorney General had given...
Count Dibula, who was that guy? If you mean the guy who called order, that is the Speaker of the House. He is the one that maintains the decorum. His name is John Bercow. He is actually a Conservative, but he is a neutral when he is in the Speaker's seat. You have a Speaker, I believe, in Congress. Similar duties, I guess. But no, different. Ours is, well, better.
Given clear legal advice approving the action. I hope the Prime Minister will now publish this advice in full today. The summary note references the disputed humanitarian intervention doctrine, but even against this, the government fails its own test.
To address Davey in the chat about the bias thing, he isn't as biased as people think. He has been accused of bullying, but that was pretty much thrown out. He does seem to be somewhat consistent. The only time where he has been inconsistent is whenever a female that isn't the Prime Minister has asked a question and they get shouted down, he gets a bit yeah, white knighty. But from what I've seen, he's not that bad. As far as like maintaining order in the house, he seems to be pretty good at it. Certainly better than his predecessor, who, honestly, he couldn't shout down a dead child.
The overwhelming humanitarian catastrophe due to the civil war in Syria is absolutely indisputable. But the Foreign Secretary said yesterday these strikes would have no bearing on the civil war. And the Prime Minister has reiterated that today by saying this is not what these military strikes were about. And Mr. Speaker, does, for example, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen entitle other countries to arrogate to themselves the right to bomb Saudi airfields or their positions in Yemen, especially given their use of banned cluster bombs and white phosphorus?
Or how about those bombs that we sell at Saudis? Just saying. It is, yeah, another factor.
Mr. Speaker, 3 United Nations agencies said in January that Yemen was the worst humanitarian crisis in the world.
Which we are partly responsible for if we're to go with the whole guilt by association.
So will the Prime Minister today commit to ending support to the Saudi bombing campaign and arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
But we have a special relationship with them that we need for shekels. Maybe we should tell the government to get their own Streamlabs or Patreon.
On the mission itself, what assessment has the government made of the impact of bombing related military facilities where the regime is assessed to store chemical weapons? What impact on the local people of chemicals being released into the local environment? News footage shows both journalists and local people in the rubble without any protective clothing. Why does the Prime Minister believe these missile strikes will deter future chemical attacks? As the Prime Minister will be aware, there were US strikes in 2017 in the wake of the use of chemical weapons in Khan Shaykhun, for which the UN OPCW team held the Assad regime to be responsible. In relation to the airstrikes against Bazai and Himshinsar facilities, the Prime Minister will be aware that the OPCW carried out inspections on both those facilities in 2017 and concluded, I quote, that the inspection team did not observe any activities inconsistent with obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention.
And that right there is the most damning statement of this entire charade. And I hate that it's Corbyn that has to be the one to point out this. Unless, of course, Theresa May's now going to be selective with who she chooses to listen to, then again, that wouldn't surprise me so much. Fact is, the OPCW conducted assessments, found fuck all. So what the fuck do you have that is so damning now that they couldn't find months ago? Maybe they should start crowdfunding. Yeah, I think they should. I think... Can you imagine that? Can you imagine there being like an advert, the government takes out an advert on YouTube and does a video with t-shirts and a Patreon, which would be really funny, and a Q&A for some of that sweet Streamlabs and Super Chats money. Maybe Andy Warski to read all the Super Chats. He'll really add to the intellectual discussion. I'm not going to rail on Andy because it works for him. He's successful, so good for him.
Can the Prime Minister advise the House? Does she believe the OPCW were wrong in that assessment, or does she have separate intelligence that the nature of those activities has changed within the last 5 months?
Which, if she does, now has to be made public, because you've already conducted a little military action. Therefore, you now need to show your hand. I want to see whether your hand has any valid information or whether it's covered in blood.
And in the light of the Chilcot inquiry, does she agree with a key recommendation about the importance of strengthening the checks and assessment on intelligence information when it is used to make the case for government policies? Given that neither the UN nor the OPCW has yet investigated the Duma attack, it is clear that diplomatic and non-military means have not been fully exhausted.
Which he has a bit of a point on. Then again, I wouldn't expect Russia to not veto something, since we're quite busy wagging our fingers at them over the Novichok thing, which they might actually be guilty of, and if they are, then surely they should be, or it should be recommended that they be removed from the UN Security Council on the grounds that they're willing to use a nerve agent, much like the sarin that is claimed to have been used in Syria.
Much suspicion.
Although if I remember correctly, their membership is up in a year? Is it a year's time? I think it is.
Rightly points to the Assad government. Chemical weapons have been used.
Yeah, Carlos David is quite right. Alex Jones struggles to find conspiracies these days because real life has become Alex Jones's mind. And yes, TC, get PewDiePie to read the super chats. If this channel ever gets monetized, I might just tweet at him, "Can you read out my super chats if I ever get any?" That would be pretty funny. He might do it. Nah, he wouldn't. Fuck off.
By other groups in the conflict. For example, Jaish al-Islam, which was reported to have used gas in Aleppo in 2016, amongst other groups. It is now vitally important that the OPCW inspectors who arrived in Damascus on Saturday are allowed to do their work and publish their report into their findings and report to the United Nations Security Council. They must be allowed to complete their...
Oh, they're one of the 5 permanent members. So that's interesting because if I remember correctly, there was a reference in a few articles that Russia only got a seat because of the United Kingdom. And there was another article reference there was a membership expiration date. Whether that be our expiration or theirs, I could not remember.
Their inspections without hindrance. And I hope the UK will put all diplomatic pressure on Russia and Syria and other influential states to ensure they're able to access the site in Duma.
That seems pretty reasonable. I'm not trying to be a dick here. I don't want to agree with Corbyn too much, because obviously I do understand the need for military action sometimes. But in this instance, now that we've conducted our little experiment, surely the right thing to do will be either to present the evidence we have, or to go and get the proof. I mean, if you're so willing to use military action, I'm surprised you haven't dropped an extraction team there to go and take some samples of the decimated land.
The bigger question must be that during the Syrian conflict, over 400,000 Syrians are estimated to have died in the conflict, and the vast majority by conventional weapons, as the Prime Minister indicated. The UN estimates that 13.5 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance, and there are over 5 million refugees. It's more important than ever that we take concrete steps to halt and finally end the suffering. Acting through the UN, the Prime Minister should now take a diplomatic lead to negotiate a pause in this abhorrent conflict. This means engaging with all parties that are involved in the conflict, including Iran, Israel, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and the US, to ensure there is an immediate ceasefire.
This is all pretty basic stuff I tend to agree with, so I'm going to focus on this comment here for a second. Diane Abbott is counting sheep. For those that don't notice, this is a different token black woman sat here. It's usually someone else with nicer hair and doesn't look like she's counting sheep. Buy Japan, save the anime. Yes. The UN have been talking about some other UN council. Yeah, the Big Five are only permanent members of the Security Council, not all councils. That's fair enough. The times they are not fighting, they love each other. True. Yeah. Anyway, let's continue.
Ceasefire. We have, Mr. Speaker, the grotesque spectacle of a wider geopolitical battle being waged by proxy, with the Syrian people used as pawns by all sides. Our first priority must be the safety and security of the Syrian people, which is best served by de-escalating this conflict so that aid can get...
I will say, I don't know how you're going to de-escalate this when this war is ideological. The civil war is ideological. How are you going to convince not conservative, well they are, I guess, basically two different tribes of Islamic tribes, one being very traditionalist and the other being moderate. The moderate being under Assad's rule, and even though that's debatable because I think he removed the ban on the veil and then he rescinded that a year later. So maybe he's not that moderate. But certainly how he goes about doing shit is not in line with that of the, quotes, rebels.
Get in. So will the Prime Minister now embark, as I hope she will, on a renewed diplomatic effort to try to bring an end to this conflict, as she indicates in the latter part of her statement? The Prime Minister states that diplomatic processes did not work. This is not exactly...
Wow. The only thing I took away from that for a second was the fact that not only is she not paying attention, but the guy 3 seats across from her was scratching his balls.
True. The initiative negotiated by John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov led to the destruction of 600 tons of chemical weapons overseen by the OPCW.
Which actually is what I was talking about earlier, and this is actually more of a damning... it's more of a statement of how good diplomacy can be. John Kerry, didn't he run for president once against Bush and lose? I think it was that salute he did that fucking sealed the deal. He was going to lose then, he was fucked. That was so cringy. It cringed the entire country out. But the fact is, it did work then. Along with the fact that there's fuck all evidence that there was any chemical weapons in Syria.
No one, Mr. Speaker, disputes that such diplomatic processes are...
She probably is playing Candy Crush. It is quite the popular game with Terwamins.
...difficult and imperfect. But that should not stop us from continuing diplomatic efforts. The refugee crisis places a responsibility on all countries. Hundreds of unaccompanied children remain in Europe, and the UK has yet to take even the small numbers it was committed to through the Dubs Amendment.
Actually, we took in over 10,000, which was the target I believe the government set. I know some say we should take in more, but we have issues, like housing issues. We don't have the space. I don't mean geologically, I mean like housing based. To go past the target that the government had set and met. But it is a debate for a different discussion, of course. I think they're just upset Syria didn't buy the guns from us. Dear oh dear. Yes, Carlos is right. Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott bumped uglies long ago. Although he's aged. She still looks well like that, even back then. Which I believe brought about the destruction of his first marriage.
I hope that today the government will now increase its commitment to take additional Syrian refugees. Will the Prime Minister make that commitment today?
Right, so now he's got his bit out of the way. I want to know in the chat what you all thought. There are, according to my thing, 33 of you watching. If you thought Theresa May made some good points and, had a leg to stand on, press 1. If you think Jeremy Corbyn pretty much destroyed her with with evidence, press 2. Because I'm very much interested in what you think. And I also want to make this a little bit more interactive. Because, you know, it's just me here after all. Minus 1,000. Oh dear. What a start. Yeah. Okay, so the chat tends to lean with me on this, that it was in fact a win for Corbyn. Yeah, I agree too. Number one, you're a bit of a confusing one because obviously you have 1 in your name, and yeah. Yeah. Sean, replace them both. I would love to do that, but I hate that he's right. That's what really sucks out of all of this. Oh shit, hang on. 1 second. Phone beep. Oh, nothing. It was an update. It doesn't matter. Go back on charge. Right. So, Theresa May's going to address some of his comments now. And I think what we'll do is we're going to finish on that. So we'll go through that bit and then we'll end, obviously. Yeah. Let's see how she gets on with this. Because if I remember correctly, she doesn't do a very good job.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I can start off by responding to the comments that the Leader of the Opposition has made on the Syrian conflict more generally, because everybody...
Well, of course, you've got to be general, because I don't think you had enough time to jot down what he actually asked. Honestly. It's not like there was someone behind you, you know, here, who could have fed you relevant information. You know, these two schmucks right here, like they normally do in PMQs. Notice how my mouse is skipping there. I need to get a new mouse. I wonder if they do tentacle mouses. In
this House recognises the nature of the conflict and the impacts that it has had on the Syrian people. The millions of people who have been displaced either within Syria or to countries in the surrounding region. We have, as the United Kingdom, as I said in my statement, we are now the second biggest...
fuck off with that. As I've said in my statement. Fuck off with that.
...bilateral donor to...
She will say that so many times in this 1 hour bit. Well, we're only like half an hour, not even half an hour in. But she would actually say it so many times. You just want to put a missile through her head.
For Syrian refugees in the region at almost £2.5 billion. We've been very clear that we believe we can help more people by giving that aid in the region, and we have been able to support hundreds of thousands of children in the region by the aid that we have given to them. We will continue to do that and continue to support and continue to be grateful for all that is being done, particularly by Turkey, the Lebanon and Jordan, to support refugees in the region.
I think the only reason Turkey are is because they think they'll be allowed to be a member of the EU if they do. Which they won't, because they don't actually meet one, not even a single one of the criteria, the 37, I believe, criteria you have to meet to even be considered for membership. Let's not forget here that Turkey is technically not in Europe anyway. But also, if they did join the EU, they'd probably become a part of the Schengen region, so all those refugees that they took in could just flood the countries anyway. Just saying.
It's a significant task for those countries, and we are supporting them in that effort. I also said, the Right Honourable Gentleman also asked me to launch a new diplomatic effort. As I said in my statement, we will
That's two.
Indeed be continuing the work in relation to this wider issue of the conflict in Syria. That means, as I said, continuing the fight against Daesh and concluding the fight against Daesh. It means our humanitarian work, as I have said, and continuing to...
It's all a good showing off about all the humanitarian shit, but you circumvented all that to begin with to conduct a military freaking attack. You don't have a leg to stand on when you use this to show off. You don't get brownie points for this. Dickhead.
Press for humanitarian access, and it also means supporting the international efforts to reinvigorate the process to deliver a long-term political solution in Syria. I
think they're talking about Amber Rudd here. I don't know. She's quite... I don't know. Maybe she has hay fever. Or, you know, maybe she could smell some really wicked BO or farts. Maybe she ate all the beans. The magical fruit.
Is necessary for all parties to be willing.
I would feel sorry for Amber Rudd. I would. But some of her policies are not so favourable. But, yeah, I'm not going to be so nasty as to rail on her entirely. Because I want to focus on this idiot right here. The one with the puffed up shoulders here. Who I think someone in this chat earlier indicated, by that I mean my stream chat, that this might have been taken from Michael Jackson. Pearls included.
To come together to ensure that they can, and to discuss and develop a long-term solution for Syria. Now let me come on to the specific strikes that took place at the weekend and the issue of chemical weapons. The Right Honourable Gentleman asked about the legal basis. We have published the legal basis for our action, and I've been very clear. I went through the arguments in my statement.
That's 3.
This is about the alleviation of humanitarian suffering. That is a legal basis that has been used by governments of all colours. It was used, as I said, in 1991 and 1992. It was also used by the Labour government to justify intervention in Kosovo as part of the NATO intervention. He refers to other areas of conflict in the world. Can I just say to him, what sets this apart particularly is the use of chemical weapons.
Chemical weapons were used on our country's soil and supposedly proven to be in Russia, to have come from Russia. But we've done nothing. Sorry, but you're a hypocrite.
This is about alleviating the suffering that would come from the use of chemical weapons. But I believe it is also important, and in this country's interest, and the interests of other countries around the world, that we do re-establish the international norm that the use of chemical weapons is prohibited.
Maybe you should uphold that standard with Russia and direct some missiles over there.
We
Pussy.
cannot allow a situation to develop where countries and people think that the use of chemical weapons has been allowed to become normalised. And that is important for us all. He talks about the OPCW and about the intervention, their investigation in Duma. As I said in my statement, the problem is they are...
That's 4.
being stopped from their investigation in Duma. The regime and the Russians are preventing them from doing that. And moreover, again, the regime has reportedly been attempting to conceal the evidence by searching evacuees from Duma to ensure that they are not taking out of the region samples that could be tested elsewhere, and a wider operation to
I feel like a tinfoil hat is needed for this.
conceal the facts of the attack is underway, supported by the Russians. He talks about other groups that have, and the possibility of chemical weapons being used by other groups. As I pointed out in my statement,
5. Oh, she's shit at this. What a fucking idiot.
it is understood that these chemical weapons were delivered by barrel bombs. Barrel bombs are normally dropped from helicopters. There is the evidence that I cited in relation to regime helicopter activity in Duma on the date in question. And it is not the case that the groups that he has referred to have access to the helicopters and barrel bombs that will be able to ensure to deliver such a chemical weapons attack.
Someone in the chat here has quite rightly pointed out on this stream chat here, chlorine can be made by anyone. Yeah, it pretty much can be. Well, to use in the way they want, yes. As a weapon, yes, it could be. And any advance on 5? TC, I hope so. I know for a fact she says it a lot more. When other MPs question her, she says it. It is hilarious. She used that when she made her statement on Brexit negotiations. She used it so many times. I'm sorry, but Cameron was better than you at this. He never had to rely on saying, as I said in my statement. He just responded. He was so much better than you, and that's what's embarrassing. He had verifiable evidence with Syria with the missile strike, and he took it to Parliament to get permission. You have hearsay, rumour and assertion, and you don't even go before Parliament, and then you fucking do something stupid.
I think it is clear, and it was on that basis that the government decided to act together with the United States and France. And I think it is important that this was a joint international effort that took place.
Because then afterwards you can have a wonderful three-way with a man who likes older women and a man that likes to grab them by the pussy with consent. The best you could hope for is getting spit roasted by Macron and Trump.
In relation to these strikes. These strikes were carefully targeted. Proper analysis was done to ensure that they were targeted at sites that were relevant to the chemical weapons capability of the regime. We did this to alleviate further human suffering. We targeted it on chemical weapons capability of the regime to degrade and deter the willingness of the regime to use chemical weapons in future. And I continue to believe it was the right thing to do.
You know what? We're going to keep going, because I honestly know it's going to happen. A lot of MPs are going to stand by Theresa May's actions. Fair enough. But I want to see if I can get more than 5 on the, as I said in my statement, because I know she does, and I want to hear more.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Fuck off.
Mr. Speaker, I fully support the proportionate, targeted action that we have taken against these sites, and I hope the government would consider similar action again in future if anyone is so foolish as to repeat chemical weapons attacks.
But we don't have the proof to actually verify this yet. And to answer MG Rogue 2018 in this stream, not in mine, but the stream chat here, no. But I'll take the £1,000 anyway.
We can all debate these matters, but it takes a real Prime Minister to actually face up to the grave responsibility. But on the question...
Dibula, you mentioned that they're massive pansy asses. A lot of people say that Macron's a leftist, but he's more of a centrist. He's not like previous leaders because he has no actual experience. He was essentially only voted in because he wasn't Marine Le Pen. That's pretty much it.
Question of the parliamentary role, I think the Prime Minister was not relying on the archaic, narrow interpretation of the royal prerogative, which no government has invoked in this country for over 50 years. They've always come to Parliament for debate and votes, if possible, on any military action. And she says there was a problem of time, but surely once President Trump had announced to the world what he was proposing, a widespread
via Twitter
debate was taking place everywhere, including many MPs in the media, but no debate in Parliament. So would she consider setting up, once the immediate issues are over, a cross-party commission of some kind to set out precisely what the role of Parliament is in modern times in the use of military power against another state?
This man, by the way, is called the Father of the House. That title was bestowed upon the longest-serving member of Parliament. He was actually going to step down, I believe, at the last general election. Proper one, not the snap one. But he was convinced to stick around for some reason. I believe it's something to do with the EU, maybe. And you can tell he's not stupid. I don't really agree with the proportionate response part, but he's quite right. This would be quite an interesting discussion as well about the role of Parliament in matters of war. And I would love to see how that plays out, especially if it's going to be cross-party, because that would bring a lot of people with very different opinions, especially if you're going to go with current government and current shadow cabinet, along with the SNP and other minor parties. I would very much like to see how this goes down.
and what exceptions, if any, there can be to the usual rule that the government needs parliamentary approval for taking grave actions of this kind.
Can I, first of all, thank my right honourable and learned friend for the comments that he's made about the action that was taken in Syria by the US, the UK and France. He refers to the parliamentary position. The decision to act was taken on the basis that, first of all, obviously an effort was made in the United Nations Security Council to put forward a resolution and to get that passed that would have enabled investigation and accountability for these chemical weapons attacks to be determined. That was vetoed by the Russians, so that it was not possible to follow that.
Was it vetoed only by the Russians? I'm curious. I'd need to look that up and maybe stick a link in the description once this is over.
Diplomatic route, and the timing was such that enabled proper planning.
There is no Mother of the House, but if the longest serving Member of Parliament is female, they are then the Mother of the House. That's a singular role. There is no parental thing here. They're not two people. It's one person. It's a very who's the village idiot? I'm not sure. But yeah, Kenneth Clarke is actually quite a smart guy. I'd often wondered why he'd never been the Speaker, but then I, at the same time, get it. He's quite old now. I don't think if he did stand up, I think most people would shut up. No one shouts him down. I'd be very interested, and he has, as you saw there, challenged the government. He's done it many times, but he's a Remain guy. He has absolutely demolished people like May and Cameron on various policies. So he is actually quite a good guy. Yeah. Makes me feel like quite the commoner when I hear his voice and then my own.
To take place, so that this was a targeted and effective set of strikes, that it was done in a timely fashion, and also that it maintained the operational security of our armed forces. And any Prime Minister who commits any of our armed forces into action of this sort must have a care for their safety and their security in doing so. Can I also refer my right honourable and learned friend to the written ministerial statement in 2016 on the War Powers Convention, which said at the end of it the following: after careful consideration, the government has decided that it will not be codifying the convention in law or by resolution of the House in order to retain the ability of this and future governments and the armed forces to protect the security.
Before she finishes, I think this should be a subjective thing. And again, I say, I think it's not such a bad idea that all of it goes through before Parliament. But if it's of a certain type of importance, perhaps done behind closed doors until it has been concluded, and then it could be made public. But then maybe I'm just, thinking a bit too much.
And interests of the UK in circumstances that we cannot predict, and to avoid such decisions becoming subject to legal action. It continues to say we will continue to ensure that Parliament is kept informed of significant major operations and deployments of the armed forces. That is what I have done today. I have come to Parliament with a statement on the action that took place. As I said in my statement, Parliament will hold me to account for the decision that has been taken.
And if you are found guilty, you will be a war criminal, and you will then be made to resign. Oh, and 6 times.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister on the sad demise of Sergeant Tunro and pass on condolences to his family and friends? Can I also thank the Prime Minister for the phone call ahead of the engagement at the weekend, as well as advance sight of her statement today? All of us, I think, in this House have an absolute revulsion on the use of chemical weapons, and we need to work here and internationally to make sure that we remove the scourge of chemical weapons from the landscape in Syria and indeed in elsewhere. The government now seems to have accepted that this House needed time to debate Syria,
which hopefully will happen later this week. if it does happen, my intention will be then to go over that debate if it's not too long. Much like this. Hopefully PMQs is also on, because I want to do that as well. Also, mostly because a fellow YouTuber, 8-Bit Thought, wants to join for PMQ, and I'd be very interested in doing that. But let's just do a little more of this.
But why have we had to wait for today? When the Prime Minister called a Cabinet meeting last week, she should have recalled Parliament.
I agree.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister leads a minority government, as was...
Very true. A weak government with a weak Prime Minister who got destroyed earlier by Corbyn. Although, in his usual pansy-ass way, he still beat her. Fair and square. She didn't answer anything properly. She said, as I said in my statement, about 4 times. Was it 5? We're on 6 now, so it's not looking good.
Was the case with the action against Daesh in 2015. This only happened...
That's fair, TA. I mean, you can support it. I'm not totally... Again, if the evidence does come out, then obviously you want... Obviously, my opinion is subject to change, but I don't think it was right to attack without the evidence. So I'm a bit on the fence.
With parliamentary approval. It was perfectly possible for the House to have been recalled in advance of Saturday's morning's airstrikes. Why was this not done? And what does this mean for the PM's position if there are further chemical attacks in Syria? Will she continue to authorise military action without consulting and without the authorisation of Parliament?
Yeah, on this, just to address TA again, I saw Sargon's video about this hate attack going on in Boston, where people actually ceremoniously, is that a word? Ceremoniously? Whatever. They dropped tea in the harbour. Now, I assume it's American tea because your tea's shit. And I don't think you'd be so silly as to sully British tea. Superior blend.
I'm glad to hear the Leader of the Opposition support our calls for a War Powers Act, because this is the best way to protect us from getting into this situation again. Mr. Speaker, has the government learned nothing from the Chilcot Review? Once again, we have been dragged into military...
I will put the Chilcot Review in the description as well. I have actually read that. And it's pretty bad as well, because there was talk about that, why that hadn't been published during the 2015 general election, I think it was. Or was it 2010? Anyway, there was a delay on it for quite a while, and it was worth it, to be honest, to read what it had afterwards. Yeah, I'll put the link to that afterwards in this description.
Action with little regard for the humanitarian situation on the ground and no long-term strategic plan.
You're lucky, Debula, that I like you, or I'd be timing you out.
The human suffering in Syria knows no bounds. Hundreds of thousands dead, millions fleeing for their lives, and 400,000 civilians still trapped in appalling conditions, deprived of food, medicine and basic aid. Over 13 million civilians in desperate need of humanitarian aid. Will the Prime Minister revisit the issue of refugees, particularly child refugees? We must do more than we have been doing. Why was action taken before international weapons inspectors completed their investigation?
1 second, I've just got to do one very important thing, so I'm just going to skip back here for a second. I'm just going to quickly switch accounts. I'm going to do something very, very productive, and it needs to be done because we can't have this hate in my chat. There we go. You know what to do, Diskanar. Make it happen. Now let's continue. We'll do another 5 minutes, ideally. Hopefully, Theresa May will respond to him because I want to see if we can get past 6.
In February, the Prime Minister told me in this House that she was committed to finding a political solution for Syria. Why then did the UK not support Sweden's draft UN resolution calling for an international investigation into chemical stockpiles reportedly held by the Syrian regime? Mr. Speaker, is the PM as surprised and concerned as I am at the US President's language that the situation in Syria was mission accomplished.
I wouldn't set too much stock on what Donald Trump says. He tweets everything he does. I don't know if he's done this yet, but I'm surprised he hasn't tweeted out, "Just dropped my morning presidential turd. Now time to bomb North Korea."
Who does she agree with? The US President or the UN Secretary General, who, like most of us, is clear? There is no military solution to the crisis. The solution must be political.
Right, so this will be the last thing we're going to look at, okay, before she takes more questions, because I can't be fucked. But I really want to know how many more times she'll say, "As I said in my statement."
Can I first of all say to the Right Honourable, he's raised a number of issues there. On the question of refugees, and particularly child refugees, and I recognise that this is an issue that has been of concern to members across this House for some time, and has been raised in this chamber on a number of occasions.
In PMQs especially, by the very man who talks about cultural enrichment.
Obviously, we took the decision that we could help and support more children, more refugees in general, men and women as well as children, by acting in the region. And that is why we have, and as I've said, we've become the second biggest bilateral donor to the region. But we also took the decision that there were a number of refugees who are particularly vulnerable, who perhaps required particular medical support, who it was right to bring to the United Kingdom under our commitment on the Vulnerable Refugees Resettlement Scheme, which we have, Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, which we have been putting in place and continue to put in place. There are a number of other schemes that we're operating to bring refugees, children in particular, here to the United Kingdom. But we continue to ensure that we are supporting the greatest number possible of refugees by actually acting in region, and I think that continues to be what we should be doing. He asked me about the issue of Parliament, and I'm sure that he would recognise that it is the case that it is always necessary for the government to be able to act in those circumstances where decisions need to be taken, but to ensure that if a decision is taken which has not been discussed by Parliament, that an opportunity for Parliament to consider that, to discuss it, to ask questions on it is given at the first opportunity. That is exactly what we have done in this particular circumstance. We have also been as open as possible in terms of publishing the legal basis for which we have
Yeah, but not the evidence. That's what I want.
On which we have taken this decision, and making information available to a number of parliamentarians on a Privy Council basis, and trying to ensure that we can provide the maximum possible briefing, commensurate, of course, with the fact that some of the intelligence that we have and have operated on is not intelligence that it is possible to share with
Oh, excuses.
Parliament. But we will be as open as possible with this Parliament. As I say, I will continue to answer questions from this Parliament on this issue.
Oh, she only did it 6 times. I know that she does get asked a lot more, and she will eventually then say more and more times, as I said in my statement. And this is linked in the description for those that are interested. Let's go back here. Fuck it. Yeah, so, what did you all think? Do you believe what my Prime Minister has said, or do you think, like I do, that she's an absolute fucking idiot? Oh, and thank you, Diskanar, very kindly for doing what needed to be done to curtail this hate speech. I will not have ill words spoken of my Earl Grey. Oh dear. Right, yes, so, before I finish, do you... Okay, I know one of you supported military action. But if you do support the military action based on what you now know, press 1. If you don't support the military action because of the lack of evidence, and certainly with the excuses given, there is a lack of it, and also the fact that the OPCW pretty much debunked a fair amount of the accusations, press 2. Because I'm quite interested to see what you all think before we finish here. And while I do that, I'm going to quickly grab my phone. Stupid messages. Piss off. 2. Okay. Well, there's only the one number 2. Oh, okay, we got more than one. Oh, Dibula's back already. Fair enough. I'll let you off. It's all good. Okay, cool. I'm glad that my chat agrees with me on this. If more comes out, and I know there was a debate held last night, but as I said earlier, as I said in my earlier statement, all Conservatives turned up, but nobody, honestly, nobody was actually interested. It wasn't official. There was no legal, there was nothing legally binding to make it official. But hopefully the one that happens later in the week is. If it happens, my intention is to cover it. As I think, 29 of you watching now, it's been good fun actually for me. So I think I will call it here, as I have to get up at 6:30 in the morning for work. My intention is if PMQs is on tomorrow, then on Thursday I will stream a response to it, and I earlier mentioned 8-Bit Thought will be joining, hopefully. So that should be good if it's on. I do reckon that this will come up. If PMQs is on tomorrow, then this is going to happen. Corbyn is going to flay her over this. It is legally questionable, and I don't believe for a second any of the shit she's currently peddling. So, thank you, TA, for the I suppose. You can still say 1, I don't mind. I don't think anyone's going to hold it against you, and Discanara is not going to time you out. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining me, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. So I'm going to end this now. So bye-bye.